Hi all. I thought it'd be nice to have another amazing aesthetic experience, this time with one of the greatest players of all time, in my view, Garry Kasparov. Now let's take what is considered as our first example of one of Kasparov's finest sacrifices ever, his immortal game in inverted commas. It was against Veselin Topalov, played in Hoogovens tournament in the Netherlands in 1999. Kasparov had just played e takes d5, so there's an attack on the queen, and I'll put on a kibitzer here. So the queen actually went to d6. It would be nice for black to be able to get the queens off here. In fact, black would be better if Kasparov had played queen takes d6. This pawn on d5 is quite weak here. This is not a very happy position. I think a move like check here, there's king b6, and black would be very, very happy with this position. Instead, after queen d6, we have a real shocking move actually played by Kasparov. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, but if you haven't, you might want to pause the video here. I'll give you 10 seconds if you want to try and guess the next move. Okay, it's rook takes d4, and I think you'd have to classify this as a king hunt sacrifice. Now, can it actually be refused? I think if black, for example, plays queen takes f4, white will be quite happy with his position after rook takes f4. He's got that f7 pawn here. It's a rook on the 7th rank. This is a very happy position for white. But there is a move which could have sidestepped the king hunt in this position. It looks a bit strange. King b6. It wasn't played, but it seems Engine's finding this move. It takes the fun out of any potential king hunt. But Topalov was game. He didn't see how the rook sacrifice here was particularly sound, and it's nice to be a rook up. So he dared to actually take it here. I guess the move king b6 is a rather Petrosian-esque sort of move, which only players like Petrosian would really consider against Kasparov. So c takes d4, and we have a spectacular king hunt now, which starts actually not with the obvious queen takes d4 check. The obvious looking queen takes d4 check is actually no good really. Queen b6, and if check here, knight d7. And what's going on here? Because the thing is, the knight's loose. So if for example queen takes b6, king takes b6, black's absolutely winning that. White's move actually here is quite a surprising looking one. Rook e7 check. So trying to drag the queen to e7. Now if queen takes e7, there's actually a mate in 4 with queen takes d4 check, and if the king goes to b8, then that bishop on h3 is actually very, very useful here. After queen b6, stopping the king going to c8, bishop b7, knight c6 at least wins the queen, but actually more significantly is a mate. So rook e7, the rook's actually immune here because of this queen takes d4. And if knight d7, then the point is we can play queen takes d6, or rook d7, we can just play queen takes d6. So rook e7, very powerful move. So maybe Topalov started getting worried at this point. His king ventured up the board. Now if it tries to go to b8, then queen takes d4 is actually very, very strong again in this position, because actually white is threatening a mate in 1 with queen a7. By the way, for most of these games there are detailed video annotations on the channel already, and definitely for this one there's a very detailed annotation. So I might be missing quite a few variations, but you can find that in the specific video for the game. So anyway, after the check we have king b6, And now the king hunt continues. Queen takes d4 check. The king is brought up the board. b4 check, king a4. Queen c3, now threatening queen b3 mate. Queen takes d5. Rook a7, now threatening rook takes a6 mate. That's parried. Giving up some material. Rook takes b7, trying to get the queens off. Queen takes f6. King takes a3. It looks as though White's king might be in trouble because of the black king visiting him. Queen takes a6, king takes, and now a stunning little move, c3 check. The point is here, if queen takes c3 in this position, then queen takes b5. That's winning here off the check. That's winning. So the queen can't take, so the king is brought to c3. But the point now is this beautiful queen a1 check. The queen is really using all parts of the board here. King d2, check, king d1. And now another wonderful move, bishop f1, attacking the queen and stopping any check to the white king, quite crucially. Now if queen takes f1 was played here, then queen c2 check and rook e7 is mating. Next move after queen e2. So bishop f1, really annoying for black. He's not able to get any checks in. Tries to counter-attack the queen here. But now this rook is pinned basically to the king and renewing the threat here. Black now has to do something radical. Has to give up his queen. What else is there for black to do apart from rook takes d7? If queen takes f1, we just take on d2. It's mate. What can black do? If queen b4, for example, then we just take that. So black plays rook takes d7. Bishop takes c4. B takes, and now white is actually material up now. Rook d3. And the queen uses a8 now. It was used a1 and now uses a8. I think this is actually one of the strangest games for the queen movements and this king hunt. So c3, we have check, king e1, f4, f5, king c1. White is just material up. It's a matter of consolidating. Now a very strong move here, queen a7, threatening this pawn as well as check. It's really annoying. So here actually black resigned. It's now hopeless. But what a magnificent king hunt. I believe this is one of Kasparov's most celebrated sacrifices, an immortal game really. It's called like Kasparov's immortal quite often, this game. Rook takes d4, immortalized it. Thankfully, because also Topalov played game and took it, allowing the king hunt. Now let's look at a game against Kasparov's arch rival Anatoly Karpov in 1985. Kasparov was playing black, and the interesting thing about this sacrifice, this is one of my favourite games from the World Championship matches between the two, because Kasparov had played this pawn sacrifice in the opening, controversially in an earlier game, and most grandmasters believed he wouldn't repeat it. And the game really caught my attention because it was at the preface of Batsford's chess openings book, but it is a magnificent game and features amazing centralization of pieces. Kasparov dared to repeat this pawn sacrifice in the opening, which was started to be known after this game as the Kasparov Gambit. So Anatoly Karpov likes his Maroczy binds. He's often played the Maroczy bind against the Sicilian to try and snuff out the opponent's counterplay. And Kasparov's personality is shining through here, trying to battle against this restraint strategy. So this Python strategy of Anatoly Karpov, trying to break free from the bind immediately, even sacrificing a pawn. And apparently lots of grandmasters, while spectating the game live, were banging their fists in the commentary and thinking this is a bluff or something. Anyway, so Kasparov took it. E takes, knight b4. So what has Kasparov got for his pawn? Let's see what happened in the game. Bishop e2, bishop c5. Both sides castle. Bishop f3. Holding that pawn. Iron grip on the pawn, it seems. If only this knight could reroute to the centre at some point. Bishop f5, stopping the knight using c2. White was actually threatening things like knight c2, but also you can consider other routes for the knight at the moment. The knight's not totally dead just yet, but bishop f5 takes away the c2 square. Bishop g5, rook e8, queen d2. And now actually the c4 square is taken away from this knight on a3. If we just go back here, knight c4 might have actually been a viable move in this position, according to engines. But anyway, Kasparov takes that away now, that opportunity with b5. So this knight seems to be one of the victims at the moment of this pawn sacrifice. Very, very deep idea. Knight d3, whilst black's knight, in stark contrast to this knight, is massively centralized. Now the knight goes to b1, h6, bishop h4, b4, and now this knight is victimized. Knight a4, bishop d6. So these knights between them haven't got too many squares right now. Bishop g3, rook c8. And look at the rooks. This knight on d3 is actually stopping the white rooks using e1 and c1 here. It's a fantastic knight. It was called an octopus knight by Raymond Keane. So b3, because it's so active in the center, it's like tentacles of an octopus. You know, so powerful there on that square, and it made a very vivid impression on me, this game. So g5, seemingly trying to squash white, gaining space, taking away squares from white, and also crucially also threatening things like g4 at the right time now, because this bishop is starting to look as though it might be running out of squares. White takes on d6 and now plays g3, trying to give the bishop some life and maybe to use the f pawn later. Knight d7. Now it looks as though black is going to have the other knight joining in, hitting f3. The bishop steps away a move before. Queen f6. And now we see a3. This bind is trying to be broken here. Kasparov just reinforces it. A takes, a takes. Queen a2. A strange looking move to have to play. What's white's idea here? Well, white has got very little piece activity. Maybe the knight can try and crawl back using the d2 square at some point. Bishop g6. d6 now was played. Kasparov doesn't take this immediately. If he took the pawn immediately, then knight d2, and maybe the knights are coming back into life. Maybe knight c4 then is getting the knights back in the game. But Kasparov actually, against d6, just plays now the move g4. Interesting, as though there's restraint now against white's pawns here. Now if knight d2 here, I think one of the points now is that in this particular position, rook e2 is quite nasty, because f2 is a big problem. So I think that might have indirectly dissuaded that, because in this position, if it taken knight d2, rook e2, I think white actually can play something like bishop f3 to evict the rook, but it's still not brilliant. But here, the way Kasparov has played it, his queen has been kept on that f3 square, so he's like restraining this knight. It's like these knights have been victims throughout this game, and even trying to get them out is now very, very difficult. So the queen actually goes back to d2, king g7 protecting that h6 pawn, f3 trying to break the bind of this g4 pawn, and now here Kasparov takes on d6. F takes, and then we get a mass centralization. Queen d4 check, very powerful looking queen. Knight f6, and with white's kingside kind of compromised by losing the f pawn, this mass centralization to try and take away this bishop, try and break through white's king seems absolutely logical. So knight e4. These knights are just incredibly impressive. Now here Karpov took on d3, and we saw knight f2 check, rook takes f2, bishop takes d3. So Karpov has had to give up his queen here, but it's not very good, this position, especially after queen e3. The back row is now vulnerable. Rook takes d3, rook c1. Kasparov doesn't mind giving up the queen for 2 rooks and more. The bishop would have to go to f1 as well in some of these variations. Knight b2, and now it's a forced mate actually. Queen f2, threatening to crash down with either rook e2 or rook e1. Knight d2, rook takes d1 actually was played here. Knight takes d1, and now rook e1 check. And here, faced with a mate in 2, Karpov resigned. For example, knight f1, rook takes, and he'll be mated. I just thought the impression given by this courageous gambit of this pawn sacrifice, was amazing. The dynamics against Karpov's style to try and break free with this d5, and it was believed it wasn't going to be repeated because it was like unsound. Now let's go to see a game against Vladimir Kramnik. Kasparov was playing white here against Vladimir Kramnik. Kramnik in those days was still playing the Sicilian Sveshnikov, so I feel sad in a way that if Kramnik had played the Sicilian Sveshnikov, he wouldn't be rewarded with at least a draw, because it was one of my favourite openings for a long time. But anyway, here Kasparov has played rook d6, attacking Kramnik's queen, and Kramnik now reacted with knight d5. It's an incredibly sharp position here, but what can actually white do? Because all his pieces seem a bit as though they're hanging in the air here. If, for example, rook takes b6, then knight takes f4, and we've got the rook attacked, we've got the bishop attacked, we've got this guy attacked. Knight takes f4, rook takes g4, and here, okay, with the knight attacked, we can either consider taking the bishop or taking the pawn to protect the knight. Taking the bishop's not very good actually. Black will be doing very nicely here. So this position, I guess rook takes f6 is about equal apparently. But anyway, Kasparov wanted more from the position. He didn't want to just take the queen. If he goes back, say, to try and keep the attack on the queen here, then queen takes f2 is very, very strong for black. The bishop's hanging here. All of white's pieces are not doing that much. No, Kasparov's got a different idea here. Can you guess what he played? If I give you 10 seconds, you might want to pause the video. Okay, he played h5, just leaving the queen there for a queen sacrifice. Now, what are the options for black? I mean, if, say, rook takes g4 to try and get some time, just queen takes, and white is threatening mate on g7. So say rook g8. That's pretty hopeless actually here, because queen takes g8 is strong because of the back row and stuff. So rook g3. Even stronger than rook d8 is knight d8 for knight f7, and this is just hopeless. White is just up in material, massive position. So there's limited choices here. If the rook steps back, then rook takes d5, and white is now threatening out deadly queen takes f6, mating here. So for example, bishop takes, queen takes is mate next move after rook g7. So this f6 is vulnerable because white is on the verge of also rook takes d5. And also you might think, well, taking on e6, doesn't really help here. White is a lot better with either taking that rook or even rook d7. And white's got rook takes f7 coming up here. Numerous threats. Say rook e5. In this position also there's still this queen f6 lurking after rook takes b7. And if takes, we can play check and h6. So basically the queen sacrifice really needs to be accepted here. There aren't many options for black at all that are valid here. So it's taken, and it unleashes now after hg this rook for the moment, threatening rook takes h7, and then carnage after g takes f7 potentially. So what are the options here for black? Well, the thing is, let's have a quick look at knight takes h3. Here, white is actually doing well with g takes. This pawn is just so dangerous. If, for example, I don't know, rook b8 just to stop f8, then we can just take the queen. If queen takes, we just take that rook, queening, and it's a mate next move actually. After queen f8, we just take the queen. So this pawn is really, really dangerous here after hg. So Kramnik takes on d6. Now Kasparov plays rook takes h7 check to drag and drop the king to g8 for this next check to be check here. The rook protecting that pawn. King takes, and now f takes, queening, and white is a little bit up in material and threatening actually mate in 2 here. Knight takes e6. You might think, is this enough to win this game? Well, the black king is now exposed. Bishop f5 check, king g7. Check, king f8. Queen takes f6 check, king e8. And now bishop takes e6. White is doing very well here. Even though he's only a pawn up, black's king safety is so compromised. Kramnik played a move which doesn't offer that much resistance in the circumstance, because after queen f8, bishop d7 check is winning the queen. If he had tried to offer resistance with, say, b4, it's still better for white. Check, for example, we can take this and then take here. We're just 2 pawns up. Eventually black will lose against good play from white. So the whole thing was pretty stunning against Kramnik from this queen sacrifice set, this whole conception of his pieces becoming quite fragile it seemed, but then this h5, a real killer move in the position, sacrificing the queen. So that was in Russia, 1994. Now let's go to Munich, Germany, for our next game. Kasparov was black here again against Vladimir Kramnik in 1994, and Kasparov's King's Indian defense was being tested. In fact, Vladimir Kramnik, I think, is the person responsible for Kasparov eventually giving up the King's Indian defense, because he had a string of great wins against Kasparov at some point. Here Kasparov played knight c5 and Kramnik played b3. Now in this position a remarkable concept was played out, and there is a detailed game video for this on the channel, by the way. Can you guess what Kasparov played in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, you might want to pause the video. Okay, Kasparov played knight f takes e4, offering the queen up. Now, a normal move from white, like knight d takes e4, actually we can just take this bishop, and we're doing very well as black. We've just snagged a centre pawn, so the queen really has to be taken to test this. Knight takes c3, so for the moment it's just one knight for the queen. Queen e1 defending the bishop, not to lose the bishop as well. because then it might be like 3 pieces with the queen, because we can take hereafter. So for the moment it's just 2 pieces for the queen, taking here. But these knights look quite dangerous, and it's a centre pawn as well. Rook c1 was played here. This might be a slight inaccuracy. Engines suggest in this position a way to go with knight b1. But anyway, we see rook c1, and now Kasparov takes that a2 pawn to another pawn, right to the dust. Rook a1, knight b4, threatening knight c2 to try and win perhaps the exchange. Bishop d1 protecting the c2 square. Now e4, attacking the rook moves. Rook e8. Black is in a powerful position with these knights which seem unassailable here. It's very, very difficult to get rid of these monster knights. Queen e3, and now black starts advancing on the king side. So it really is a positional queen sacrifice for what seems to be at the moment 2 pawns and 2 pieces. But this bishop is a monster on this diagonal. These knights are wonderfully placed. h4, trying to restrain perhaps against g5 here at some point. Rook f8, g3, rook a e8. Black's pieces are beautifully coordinated. King g2, knight b d3, the octopus knight position which we saw against Karpov. Beautiful knight on d3. Rook g1, and now black crashes through with f4. The queen in this structure hasn't got much to do. Rook takes f4, and white's pawns are having structural damage. h5, g5, not giving white any sniff of counterplay really, even though he's got the queen for what seems to be inferior, a reasonable balance. But in this position it's just so strong for the black pieces. Rook h1, rook f4, bit of toying there, and now building up pressure on f2. f3, like in the Karpov game, f3 to try and break Kasparov's bind, a little bit analogous to that. Rook h4, and now here, if white dares to play rook h1 in this position, then actually e takes f3 is actually quite strong here. For example, bishop takes bishop d4, and black is doing very, very well. There's numerous attacking moves like check here, knight f4. So actually we see white playing f takes e4, so he left that rook on h4 there. Knight f4 check. Now if the king goes to f2 in this position, knight takes d5 actually wins the queen. It's a discovered check and wins the queen. So after this check, the king actually dropped back to g1. Knight cd3. Horrible things like knight h3 are in the air. White tries e5. That's actually just taken. Rook c1. Now rook h3. The queen is just a victim here along with the king. Knight f3, g4. Black's going to be winning more material, it seems. What can white do here? White's helpless in this position. He takes on e5, offering his queen for the knight and the bishop. Is that a fair trade here? It wasn't with extra pawns though. Check. King g2. Rook takes f1, king takes. Black is material up. It seems actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Only by 2 pawns though, but king safety has been compromised, and this g pawn is very dangerous after g3. Black is now threatening knight f4 in, for example, g2 at the right moment, or other things even worse. King g2, knight f4 check, and here actually white resigns. This g pawn is just a winning asset now. For example, if king f1 check, black could actually play either bishop d4 or rook h3 here. This pawn is very, very dangerous. or it's a mating net as well. The king is precariously placed. There's actually a forced mate in 5 in this position. For example, rook b1. Forced mate. There's a forced mate in 4 with bishop d4, and queening, etc. So magnificent queen sacrifice, positional queen sacrifice in this game. Stunning one. It must have stunned Vladimir Kramnik to have seen this knight takes f, knight f takes e4, offering that queen sack. Now let's go to New York in 1990. Garry Kasparov was white against his arch rival Anatoly Karpov in 1990. Part of this match was in New York, part of it in Lyon. Now here, Kasparov had played knight g4 in this royal pairs, what started as a royal pairs, but black's king side has been compromised. Without that f-pawn, black's king is slightly weaker than usual. And this bishop seems very, very dangerous on the diagonal. Queen e8 was played, and even though the rook seems to be defending h6 at the moment and also putting pressure on the center, and this pawn looks as though it might be dangerous, at least to distract some pieces or get rid of some attacking pieces, White actually played knight takes h6. So if rook takes h6, what would happen? The thing is here, knight takes d6 is a double attack on the queen, which is very, very dangerous. If queen h5, White, pardon me, after queen h5 here, White has a number of good choices. Rook g5, for example. So if queen takes, there's knight f7 check, and if queen takes d1, knight f7 check, and look at this bishop stopping the king coming out. Knight takes h6 check, and now rook takes d1, and this pawn is pinned. White is actually doing very well here in this position. So it seems that knight takes h6, the rook cannot really afford to take on h6 here. This is the shocker, that knight takes d6 is very strong. Shocking idea that after queen h5 there's rook g5, but this knight f7 is just an incredibly strong idea. If queen d7, for example, then the queen is not guarding g4, so the white queen can come to g4. Pardon me, the queen g4 is strong here anyway. If queen takes g4, knight f7 check, taking on h6, and this is very, very strong, this position. So anyway, knight takes h6. Karpov tried c3, at least trying to get rid of some attacking pieces, but White didn't take care. He played actually knight f5, offering the bishop, and initially engines didn't even like this idea, and now it's evaluating it differently. This needs to be given on high depth to engines, but intuitively there's a lot of pieces around the king to justify giving up the bishop here. C takes b2, queen g4, and the engine recommended defense to try and maintain equality is actually rook g6 here to offer the rook. But now this failed. The engine is not looking deep enough. It actually changes its mind about this at a higher depth. Then actually queen h4 check, rook takes, knight g5 is actually very, very strong for White. Very, very tricky position even for engines to evaluate this. But there's a lot of pieces simply around the king. Knight e7 being threatened to win the queen now. What does actually black do in this position? If, for example, knight f4, you know, we just win the queen, and the attack carries on a little bit as well. Knight e6 check. It carries on. So it is actually a really, really dangerous position. If queen d7, again, the engine initially thinks, oh, that might be okay, then changes its mind again. There's just so many pieces around black's king here. These knights are working exceptionally well with the queen. Queen h5 check, king g8. And in this position, a simple quiet move is actually crushing, like king h2. Or even rook g6, just getting rid of the rook here. If, for example, taking, the threats now, like knight h6, are really difficult to handle. If king h8, taking here is strong. White's just got an amazing attack with the two knights, the queen and the bishop here. So anyway, Karpov tried bishop c8. And we see queen h4 check, rook h6, that's just taken, g takes, and now a quiet move in the midst of all this, king h2, queen e5, now a very powerful move, knight g5, threatening knight f7 check, forking queen and king, queen f6, and technically this is actually a forced mate in 8 against black. Rook e8, bishop f5, a forced mate in 6 now, but Kasparov is not a computer all the time, or super accurate like a computer anyway, but the forced mate in 6 is not played. Knight f7 check is a forced mate in 6, queen takes, check, bishop h7, rook takes a8. This is a forced mate sequence apparently, so because we're going to be taking here after. But anyway, Kasparov played the less optimal but still winning continuation here, which looks quite spectacular though. Instead of playing after bishop f5, he played actually in this position, instead of playing knight f7 check, he played the more spectacular queen takes h6 check. And he's scooping up a lot of black pieces by force. After takes, check, king has to go to h7, bishop takes f5 check, queen has to give herself up, bishop takes g6 check, king g7, rook takes a8, and the bishop is actually holding b1, bishop e7, rook b8, a5, check, king f7, takes f7, bishop takes d5, his pawn's going. Or, well, if the king moves, then just bishop a2. So black resigned here. Black is material down, lost position. So a spectacular Roy Lopez game with a lot of concentrated pieces around black's king. Kasparov sacrificing his bishop on b2 there, spectacularly. And the engines don't even appreciate this, but from a human point of view, there's just so many pieces coordinating so well. Queen's coordinating with knights is a very powerful weapon here. So the loss of that dark square bishop, still White's attack seems incredibly powerful, ultimately winning. Now let's go to 1995 in another World Championship match. Kasparov was playing White against Vishy Anand, and I think this might have been the product of amazing preparation at the time. Vishy had just taken on c3 and attacking the rook. It seems as though White wants to do something about this, but there's also other more positional moves like knight d4. Kasparov now basically he offers the rook in effect. He plays knight b3 because this can be taken. Now again, after bishop takes b3, offering the rook. For the moment, actually, though, the rook isn't taken. Vichy actually perhaps wisely plays knight d4 now. If he had taken the rook here, this is dangerous. Queen h5, g6, queen f3. This diagonal is very, very sensitive here. What does black do here? After knight d8, not taking the rook, but actually queen f6 is even stronger, attacking this one. White's got a lot of threats here, like bishop h6 on the cards. So we see a more positional move, resisting the rook for a moment, knight d4. But Kasparov persists. Take my rook, he says. Queen g4, take my rook. Now Vichy did take the rook. Bishop takes e6. So what's the idea now? Well, bishop d7 is a major threat to address. Rook d8 does address the d7 square, amongst other things. But now a spectacular move, bishop h6, attacking the queen. But it serves another purpose to play it to h6. Bishop takes g7 to weaken this diagonal, to knock out the g6 defense. So if bishop takes g7, we just play queen h5 now, queen f7, mating. Queen d3 was played, protecting this diagonal, offering the rook here. Kasparov takes that rook, and after queen g6, he doesn't mind potential exchange of queens. Bishop f6. Black doesn't really want to take the queens off here. He would be just worse. Vichy plays bishop e7. White takes on e7 here, and now actually Vichy did take the queens off. If king takes e7, this is actually annoying because of queen h4 check on that rook on d8 if king takes. And if king e8, bishop g4 now threatens bishop h5. So I think Vichy had enough of this, the threats of the queen, and he actually took the queens off here. But now, in this position, white is better, but it's still very, very interesting how these centre pawns are used. The king is brought up, king e3, b4, bishop d1, helping to defend against black's passed pawn potential. Now if b3, trying to make the most out of these pawns, taking, this is not very good, this position. The king is putting pressure on d4, so there's no rook b8 without dropping the knight. So this pawn is actually dropping off here. So Vichy's hope of a passed pawn has been slowly extinguished, a3 fixing the pawns a bit. And now Kasparov starts to make use of his own connected passed pawns. Rook d5, rook c4, c5. The pawns are getting very fixed. King e4, supporting now the e5 pawn, which means f5 is coming soon. Dropping the c5 pawn as well. Rook d5. And now f5. White's passed pawns are more significant now. They're proven to be more significant than black's. The g5. This bishop is also given the h5 square. Rook c1. Rook d6. Now f6 is on the cards. Black actually resigned here. It's an overwhelming position. If, for example, b3, check, and this bishop h5 is really crushing, threatening rook d8, black's king safety is called in this question. It's not just the passed pawns trying to queen. What does black actually do here? If knight b7, rook e6, threatening mate on e8. And it's actually a forced mate, believe it or not. So check, check. The checks run out there. f7, rook e8, just winning trivially. So black resigns on this much earlier at move 38 before this happened. So move 38, rook d6. Vichy resigned in this position. I think it's a product of fantastic theoretical preparation as well, this sacrifice in this particular example. So, okay, let's go to Nixek 1983. Kasparov playing against Lajos Portish. Just played e takes d4, and you'll notice in the position there is an absence of the defensive knight on f6, so h7 looks a bit more vulnerable than usual. Black played knight, now knight a5, trying to get some queenside counterplay. Is White going to sit and defend this c4 pawn? No. d5, the bishop now eyes g7 as well. He's got both bishops eyeing g7 and h7 here. After e takes, Kasparov takes time for c takes d5. So bishop takes d5 is played now. You might wonder why. Well, the thing is, White has quite a strong position here. He's threatening weakening moves like queen e4 to encourage g6. We'll just rook fe1. It looks like a strong position with that pawn there. So bishop takes d5 was played to try and get rid of that centre pawn. Taking on h7 gets back the bishop. For the moment it looks as though, well, okay, can Black defend this? He's at least taken out the equation here, White's dangerous light square bishop. But now, can you see what Kasparov played? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, you might want to pause the video. Okay, a bolt from the blue, bishop takes g7, sacrificing the dark square bishop. King takes g7. Is this a prelude to a king hunt or something? Well, knight e5 now is played. So the knight could potentially coordinate with the queen. Queen's got g4 here. Now the knight has just made way for the queen to come to g4. So this looks like danger ahead now. A king hunt. Rook fd8, check. King f8. Queen f5, threatening mate on f7. f6. Now knight d7 check. Black counter sacrifices here. What else? If he plays, for example, king g7, this is overwhelmingly good for White after rook e1. Lots of threats here. So Black just counter sacrificed. Rook takes d7, queen c5. So it looks as though rook against knight and bishop should be in theory okay, but here Black's king has been really compromised, the king safety. Queen h7, pressure is being built up potentially on e7 now. Rook c7, check, king f7, rook d3, keeping the tension, keeping lots of threats, like rook g3 on the board for Black to worry about. The knight is allowed to centralize a little bit, but rook fd1, knight e5, knight is allowed to centralize. Check, king e6, check, king f5, but we do have now a king hunt. g4 check. Now if the knight dares to take here, then we have rook f3 check, and that knight's going soon. After king e5 we can just take the knight. So king f4, the king's been brought up the board, and now the point of doubling the rooks is revealed. That rook d4 is now supported. King f3, queen b3 check. And here Portish resigns. If he plays something like queen c3, then queen d5 check, king e2, queen e4 is mating next move onto queen e3, which is to take the queen mate. So a fantastic king hunt there. Even though it seems as though there was a little bit of a tragedy that Black got rid of one of the attacking bishops, like in the game against Karpov we saw earlier. It seems Kasparov didn't mind. He still had enough attacking pieces. Doesn't need the two bishops. He can get rid of both bishops and he can create a king hunt. With knight e5 it just seems a very, very difficult position to defend in practical terms. this position here. Engines give it as better for white as well, at quite a large depth. Now the last, I think, professional game of Kasparov's career was against Britain's #1, against Michael Adams, and it was a beautiful Sicilian defence. And Michael Adams, a great positional player, he played knight b3, and here we see a really stunning move played by Garry Kasparov, and this game is on the channel as well if you want to explore it further in more depth from the start, etc. So black to play. If I give you 10 seconds, what did Garry Kasparov play in this position? Okay, he played actually knight takes c2, weakening that b3. Looks actually quite thematic. But white surely can question this sacrifice, because of knight takes c5. Isn't black potentially losing a piece? Well, we see actually a very strong knight a3 check, king a2. Queen takes c5, and it looks as though, okay, clearly we don't want to take on a3, we'll lose c3. The beautiful point is revealed actually in this position. Black has a really crushing move that might actually be another move to have at least an advantage, but the real bone crushing move now is played. Knight c2, offering the queen temporarily. It can't be taken if knight takes c5, rook takes b2 as mate. In the game, king b1 was played, and now queen a3. Black is threatening rook takes b2 check. Michael Adams resigns in this position. Let's have a quick look at queen takes c2, trying to grab some material. Actually, of course, it looks as though it's defending b2 as well. The point is rook fc8. And where is the queen going now? If queen d2, queen takes a4, and the attack rages on. White's got no attack of his own here, and that's the problem. He's going to lose b2 and lose the queen. Say bishop d1. Black could even throw in bishop takes e4 check here, and then win the queen, and it's pretty horrible. The attack just carries on. So anyway, on move 26, queen a3, Michael Adams actually saw the dangers here, that rook fc8 is going to drive the queen away from b2. a4 is dropping off. If you might think, well, can he hold on to a4? That's another possibility. Here, then b2 is on the fire. Rook takes b2, and we're just mating on b2. So I hope you enjoyed this little tour of some of the greatest sacrifices of Garry Kasparov, some of my favourites, and some very highly celebrated games. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.